Welcome back to the Obojima Podcast. We're back after a long hiatus of like 3 or 4 weeks, some vacations, some Christmas, and now we're here, better than ever, ready to talk about a new topic. If you're not familiar with the Obojima Podcast, we just sit down and we have our weekly writers meeting where we shoot the stuff. And
it's a very polite way of saying it.
Yeah, and we chat. We write. We sit down. We talk about cool ideas. And today's podcast episode, we're going to be talking about the future of Obojima.
I thought it was just going to be us writing. We just have our
individually.
Just all writing.
It's 40 minutes of us writing, being very quiet, and then we popcorn read at the
That's
end.
Right. We read in the writers or the Actors Guild.
Oh yeah, there it is. Perfect. I'm actually a member of SAG.
Really?
No.
Oh. See how gullible I am? You could feed me a line. You could have had me going there, Jeremiah. Yes.
You don't know why?
Yeah.
I'm actually a member of SAG.
Wow. You're really good. You totally acted me out of the truth there.
Ronald Reagan got me into it.
Oh. Well, that figures.
My old friend.
Dear friend Ronald.
He's like my grandpa's cousin.
Yeah. Book 2. This is I sprung this on Adam and Ari earlier. I want to chat about now that Obojima's finished, not finished, but now that book 1's complete. I want to talk about what did we like, what didn't we like, what are we missing. I want to talk about how we feel about the completion of book 1, and then I want to chat about what's in store. We're already planning on doing a book 2. What do we want to include in book 2? What do we think book 2 desperately needs to help flesh out what was missing from book 1? And so, let's just jump into it. We were actually just off camera talking about, I think, one of the things I feel is missing from book 1, which is I just don't think we have enough town locations.
Yeah.
I think we 30 locations when we were writing it sounds like a lot, and it is. I mean, it's a third of the book, but at the exact same time, it's just like, wow, 30 locations doesn't do an amazing job of fleshing out a space in a world. They feel very sparse in between each other, even though we know that there are locations in between all of those. Because they're not detailed, I feel like we could use a few other towns in there, or a village, or another place that isn't a hyper-specific location like a ramen shop or a tea house.
Yeah.
Well, I think there's the question. First of all, like anybody looking at book 1 and you're going through the locations, there's always the tendency to think, or often a tendency to think, this is a comprehensive, look at everything that exists on this island. And this is basically, we did like we've selected different things to show as opposed to showing you everything, so that there's more going on the map than shows up there. And it's also that serves a couple functions. One is that we don't know everything there is to know about this place. We can continue iterating on the island, but it also means that you get to fill it in as a player, or as a DM. You get to continue creating Obojima. Question I have about the in the 5 minutes we had to think about this. What I'm curious about, Jeremiah and Adam, I'd love to get your take on this too. What do settlements, what do villages, what are these kind of starting locations, what do they do for you? Like what is the purpose of them in the game? Because there's a world building way of thinking about it, of just like logically there are more villages where people live. Like these are the gathering places of people. For our purposes, especially we're making RPGs, all of these places are essentially kind of game objects, right? Like they need to serve some function. So it could be to serve as like a hub for exploring this entire region, so you can keep going back to this place. It could feel like home. It's something that you can imperil, which is one of my favorite things to do. And so you're creating connections with your players and parts of the world. But what do you want to see if you're saying like book 2 needs to have more of these things? What is the function that they serve for it? Like why that as opposed to another dungeon, for example?
Yeah. I mean, for me, at least in the way I look at it, is I think as I explore a region as I set between two destinations. Right now, it feels like our map is evenly spread locations all throughout the island, and you are traveling in between those 2 points. But I think what for me, if I'm in Okiri and I'm heading Diatomon, what's the stop in between that I get to like? That's the side plot adventure that I feel like is maybe missing. Like I'm looking for that. This isn't my destination, but it is an adventure that I get to be had. And here's a cool little quirky moment that I get to enjoy with my players. And I feel like the more fleshed out spots that are pre-generated that I can throw a little side arc story into, the better. At least that's the way I tend to play D&D is, I'll often set a big overarching story for my players to go on. And then it's all about the little moments in between that before they get to the big plot that I enjoy the most, because I'm usually improving. I'm not planning any of that. It's like, oh, they're kind of by a town, or I'm going to make up something, or I'm going to throw a little village in there, or a little gathering or bandit camp, and we're going to have something fun. And I think, although it might be easy for me to generate those things on the fly, I know a lot of people would have an easier time if those things were already on the map and they just have to come up with the story aspect of it.
Yeah, I think also, like, as we've been creating this world and writing these adventures and writing these locations, we're also kind of like, I know when I'm writing them, I'm exploring this kind of, it's not new, but it's emerging from D&D that it's, generally you're writing a dungeon where there's things to fight and kill and then loot to take. Obojima is not that at all. Obojima is more like writing areas to role play and puzzles to solve, and it's almost like stories to complete. Like there is a story that's ongoing in a village that you as an adventurer, you need to complete it in some way. You need to resolve the conflict, or you need to, create an outcome that is fun and beneficial to the people that are in the village, or some kind of charming, delightful thing that happens in the story that you are a part of, and that because one of the things that is like, what is the reason to adventure in a location? Like, why are we going there? Why are we playing Dungeons and Dragons in this location? So kind of we're when I'm writing those things, I'm informing myself of like a new way to do it, because I grew up playing the old hack and slash D&D. It's like you just go in, you smite monsters, and you get loot. And then only later on did I start to kind of explore story, and resolving things maybe non-violently. So that's the other reason I think for writing these towns, and each one, it helps DMs that may have come up in sort of the traditional D&D way, to like, hey, here's another way to look at it. So
that's a good point. Like on the the absence of a town, it's significantly easier for a DM, especially a new DM, to throw a combat in your exploration than it is to come up and flesh out a town on the fly. And so the more of those we generate into the world, the easier it is to, I guess, fall into that low-hanging fruit. Sure. That is like, well, if I just throw a monster at them, that fills up the space.
Yeah. And it takes like sort of like, I don't know, story writing or adventure writing skill, or narrative skill. I don't know what the right word is for that, but to create a compelling and engaging activity and gameplay that has that's generally non-combat. I think it's difficult. It's super easy to throw a monster in there and just be like, this thing is guarding the treasure, or this thing has captured the mayor and is, you have to kill it in order to free the mayor and save the town.
I mean, we've talked about this in previous episodes, but I think there's also a thing where combat doesn't have to result in death, right? Like you can drive things off. You can fight something long enough for one of your, the group you're escorting or whatever to escape, and then you can pull back. Like you don't always have to just, violence doesn't have to end in death.
Yeah.
Also, which is, I think, again, like if you look at Obojima, like the subclasses, it still tells you like you're going to be fighting things, right? Yeah. Like that's still D&D itself, even though you don't have to fight. All the subclasses tell you there's some amount of damage you're going to be dealing.
It's baked in.
It's baked in. Like it's baked into the game. And I think that, you can embrace that in fun ways, right? Like if there's we talk about like there are ways you can duel people, with the sword schools and stuff like that. That's still a combat, but it's not, I'm going to kill you and take your wallet kind of combat, right? So I think there's like the Obojima way of doing it. And I think exploration is a big part of it. Like you said, in the role-playing game, the role-playing element is definitely part of it. What I'm curious about is you're talking about like these things on the fly. Like you as a DM, you want these things on the fly, or like new DMs if they, the idea is that this is an improv tool. If that's the case, like if we're looking at locations, do we want to create essentially kind of floater locations that can be dropped in? Like these are locations that are kind of toolbox locations that can be placed where they're needed. Or do you want to say, no, these are the locations where they're found on the map?
That's super interesting.
I don't hate like a list of these location or these places are unique to everyone's game. I don't hate that idea. I also don't hate of revisiting the kind of like transient location concept that we had earlier.
Sure.
Where it's just like, here are 3 different hut villages that pop up occasionally, or
like I don't know.
Just villages on the back of a giant beast or whatever. Yeah.
The picture of the serpent, the serpent road, the elder spirit. Originally, one of the ideas that we had for that was that it was a merchant's road, and like it was almost like it would upheave itself and lift and then land somewhere else, and wherever it landed, merchants would flood to it and they would sell on it. And because it's like this main path that would take you to a certain part in Obojima, right? Like, so it's it's this idea that like every 3 months the road is in a new portion of the island and the merchants flood to it and sell for 2 months, and then it uplifts itself and goes somewhere else. It's kind of like, like they're always wandering and following this thing, but we ended up abandoning that idea and didn't move with it. But again, that concept of like, well, now I just have a list of things that I can kind of drop in wherever I need.
And,
I mean,
I
think like the Spirit Train is a great thing for that, because the Spirit Train has potentially hundreds of depots around Obojima. Nobody knows where they are, but we could just develop like, here's 20 like fleshed out Spirit Train depots with like little adventures in them and maybe some weird spirits that you can encounter, and the DM can put them anywhere. Like there's no set location for them, and that works.
I like that. That being said,
dun dun dun,
we have spent a lot of time on my first topic here, and I'd love to just bring it back to the general topic, which is like, let's start with the, looking at Obojima Book 1, what are you really happy with, and what did you feel like maybe we were missing something? Like that, or maybe something that you wrote or had an idea that you're like, God, I wish we could have put this in and we didn't have a chance to. Is there anything that's sitting in the back of your mind that you're like, oh, this was so cool, or this is something that we jammed on really early and we just couldn't, find a way to fit it in? And again, as you guys are thinking, another thing I was, I really wish we had more space for the factions. I would have loved to include, I know, especially cutting Ari's sword school sections were brutal, because that was happening right at the very end of the book, and Ari had written so much about these, about them, and I was like, I just, I need to fit them on this amount of pages.
I will take out my sword.
I know,
and cut
it was sad.
The sword school.
Kill your darlings.
So there's stuff like that. There's same thing with like there's things in the Fishhead Coven location that we had to cut.
We could have done more covens, like more different, witch factions. And like that would have been cool.
Well, we really detail the Fishhead. We talk about the other 5 or something like that.
Yeah, they're mostly mentioned. They're not as fleshed out. And again, part of that's intentional, right? To kind of, so if you don't want to be part of the Fishhead Coven, this is space to play, and kind of, there's some kind of guidance about what these covens are about, but then you get to kind of really flesh them out.
You can make your own.
Exactly, or make your own, right? And you get kind of a taste of what that is. But yeah, I think those are the things. again, this goes back to kind of even the locations. I think the thing that I would like to see more is tools to make Obojima yours once you have that book, right? Like this is your Obojima. And I think that because there's so much that we even, just talking here and in our writing about the feel of Obojima. What is this place? What's the experience of Obojima?
Yeah.
And then, kind of if there were tools to give DMs and even players to more immerse themselves in that space and kind of take ownership of the island. I think that's something that I would like to see. But even the faction stuff that's in there, I really like. I think it added that extra bit of dimension to the island that I love.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm a map lover.
Yeah.
So it would have been cool, like, to have more maps in. That's something that I'm like, we could have done that, or we just don't have the space. But I think that's also something to throw to like a book too. Is just like cool maps.
That's cool.
Okay.
Like the Temple of Shum would be great to map out.
When you say maps, are you thinking like a not architectural, that's maybe a bad word for it, a more bird's eye view overarching map of like, I wish we had a map of Yadaman? Or are you thinking like, I wish we had a battle map or a like
both
Both.
Jeremiah?
Yeah, I want
Give us
maps
both.
upon maps.
Yeah,
that's
all
a good
kinds
one.
of maps. Like, I would love a map. Like, this is something I learned from Jared Blando, who's a map maker, a D&D cartographer, and also artist extraordinaire, and a super nice guy.
Give me more details.
Yeah.
Tell me other things he does.
He's a man of great stature and bearing, an imposing figure. No, he told me, we were talking about a map doing for a D&D adventure, and he said, like, who drew the map? Who drew this map? And I'm like, oh, well, any cartographer. And he's like, no, like in world. Like, who drew this?
Yeah.
And this was for a map of the 9 hills of Ernest. And I said, well, okay, let me think about it. So I came back to him and I said, imagine a map that was drawn by somebody who astral projected, went into Avernus and was drawing it as fast as they could and went insane as they were doing it. He's like, okay, great, got it. And he went and drew the map.
So cool.
So I would love to see maps drawn by what would a
By
map
perspective of
by a Nakadama
Yeah.
sage look like, or what would a map look like drawn by?
Love that.
Yeah.
Like a Courier Brigade road, like map of the roads.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, map of the Gale Fields.
Yeah.
Like, that would be
Ooh,
sweet.
And you can tell each one has like its own like, the Courier Brigade's really rough look. Like it's kind of
Yeah.
bumpy. And then like a Nakadama one has like they accidentally spill ink and they're like their lily pad hand.
Their
or whatever,
sucker,
the
like,
little step on it.
But-
Maybe someone with a spirit companion walks across the top of it and leaves ink trails.
I mean, you could have an overlay map where it is the spirit realm, same, but like,
that's
that'd be really
cool.
cool, right?
Oh, man.
You get to
Okay.
see like
Super
spirit
sweet.
locations and stuff.
because there's 80s tech, because we have first age tech. What if they were utilizing the plastic filament that used to be on old school writing projectors? Like how they
Oh,
like
yeah.
if you went to class, they'd have like it'd be like a roller and it'd be a
Mhm.
huge roll of plastic, and the person would write on it, and then it would project exactly what they're writing onto the wall. What if
The
they just
overhead
had
projector,
those
yeah.
on top of maps, and it's like, here's the map, and then here's the spirit realm version of the map that we painted on.
We also have to include an overhead projector.
That's right.
Like, why didn't we do that?
Overhead projector not included. But you could also do, like, if you did a map of the Gale Fields drawn by the Courier Brigade, they would be interested in certain landmarks and things that,
Yeah.
like, another faction, like a Witch Coven faction, would be like, here's where you find this ingredient, that ingredient.
That's
so you
super
see
cool.
all the
Yeah.
ingredients.
Seeing maps that would be found or tucked in the almanacs, like the ingredient almanacs, would be really cool too.
Oh,
So
man.
cool. Yeah.
That's very cool. Well, but I almost want to do like that's almost a separate product. It's like,
True.
here's just
I still want maps in the book.
here's
though.
like, I know maps in the book, but
But
it's
yeah,
almost
separate
like,
product, super
it's
awesome.
almost like well, like it just depends on. I guess it depends on how many you do. If we do 5 maps, just toss it in the book.
Yep. Great.
If you do 20 maps,
That's
then it's
product.
like,
But if there was a whole index or If there's a whole like section in the back of the book, an appendix, that's the word I'm looking for. It was just maps. I mean, that'd
be cool.
Yeah.
pretty awesome.
Yeah.
Well, I also like the idea, if we are making them in world, if you made, like, if we had printed maps that you could be like, oh yeah, here's the map that you found.
Yeah.
And then you just hand it's like, now you have this one. Here it
Yeah.
is. I also, I did this in my own game where I drew a big map and then I ripped it into a couple pieces, and then I would just give them portions of the map, and they could kind of assemble realizing how big the continent was in game in real time. Like, oh my gosh, I thought this was significantly smaller. I thought was always really fun.
You could also have maps that you might find that are relics, that are in-world relics. Like this is a map at the height of the Nakudama.
Whoa.
Like
civilization.
an 80s, or like an 80s hiking map or something like
Yeah.
that.
It's a first stage object. Yeah. That's cool.
The Tokyo subway rail
Oh.
line map.
It'd be like a section of the Spirit Train, or that.
Yeah.
That is cool.
Super cool.
Okay, maps, locations, more faction details.
I think digging into more of the Spirit Realm locations
I
would
think
be really
Spirit
cool.
Realm's really important.
Yeah.
We touched on the Spirit. I think early on we even discussed like, are half of the locations in the Spirit Realm, and then it's like, well,
I mean, for this one, we know that we're introducing people to the island of Obojima.
yeah,
And we want the spirits to be this thing that you are interfacing with and hinting at something larger, right? That there's more going on here, that there's layers
yeah,
to the, to reality, really. And so I think that something in book 2 that gets to dig into, a handful of more spirit realm locations, because people are going to be, they've explored the island, they want to see like, what's through the next door, right?
Yeah.
And I think the spirit realm is one of those places to check out for sure.
There's also go ahead, Adam.
Oh, no. I was just thinking, like, when I got into Spirit Realm, I'm like, oh, Spirit Realm creatures that you encounter.
Yeah.
And then you get into, like, Spirit Realm locations where we can get weird with it. Like, it doesn't have to deal with, like,
Let's get
let's
weird.
get kind of
Let's get
weird.
weird.
You don't have to deal with physics the same way that you have to do on Obojima. Like, Obojima has floating, like, skeletal fish and all that, and that's strange. But in the Spirit Realm, you can get even stranger.
I always liked when we talked about the idea that things exist, things that exist in the spirit world or in the spirit realm, and then in the material world, that they are those beings could exist in both places but look different in both places.
Yeah.
Like they manifest in different ways,
Yeah,
and I
that's
just like that's something we could really explore.
Didn't
further.
we have like an idea, and I forget who did it. It was there's like a little cat that you see in Obojima in the physical realm, and then the spirit realm, it's like this majestic, like crazy.
Yeah, I did
like
we-
all cats?
Yeah,
like
that's
all
right.
cats in the spirit realm there. That's why they're always looking around at
Yeah,
stuff.
they're like,
What do you
"What?
see?
What are you seeing? Yeah,
Tell me.
run.
There is and this might be its own topic, but something you guys were reminding me of as we were kind of detailing. We were like, Ari said something earlier. I just wanted to bring it as a general point of topic to discuss with you guys, and then we'll jump back. It's a little of a tangent here. You were discussing like leaving space for people to create. Like here is the world, but then we're not giving you definitive answers because we want you to build. Pardon me, everyone. I ran like one city block to catch up with you guys before we started the podcast, and I am dying because of it.
It's still recovering.
It's still recovering. It's not good. That is not good.
don't go like the Skeksis and the Dark Crystal.
yeah.
It's like,
Let's do the rest of the episode with Skeksis voices.
Skeksis.
Well,
The question I have, though, and this is something that's been coming up, is we're getting people, rightfully so, intrigued and wanting official answers. Where it's like, this is detailed, but like, like blah, 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 blah. This character did this thing. What does that mean? Or like, who is this character? Or like, what's the person's name? Or how does this happen? And it's funny because as we were writing this book, we're leaving it open-ended for you to tell that story however you want. And this is where I think Obojima is becoming a unique situation. Not to toot our own horn, not to try to toot horns here.
let's horn toot.
But Obojima is becoming an IP in itself where people are intrigued in the world maybe not as much as they are just to play in it, but like there's this level of like, I don't want to come up with my own answer. I just want to hear the official true to lore answer. And that's something that's really, really interesting as we're creating future things. I think one of the things you asked earlier when we were talking about the towns is, what does this town serve as a purpose for you? And like, well, in D&D terms, it's a tool for me to like bounce off of. But as a writer's term, it's also like, well, we're also fleshing out this IP now. Like we are expanding the universe and saying, here's the rest of the world. It's just I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts generally on like, this is like a very, we're in a weird space where it's like, we are creating both an IP. And so should we be writing for that IP where we're fleshing out everything and giving official answers? But we're also creating a D&D space where it's like, we need to leave things vague so people have an easier time, because when you say like, oh yeah, it's the captain of the Postal Knights, you don't give them a name, they can be whoever they want, whoever you want to be in your game. But if you give them a name, then that's the character and this is the space, you know?
I have a lot of thoughts about this.
Oh man.
Maybe not a lot. I have deeply felt.
Deeply passionate thoughts.
Yeah. So I think the question comes down to, I mean, if you are creating both a D&D setting, an RPG setting, and it's, you know, an IP by consequence, right? The people are connected to, you have to decide what you're prioritizing. That's like the first thing. The reason I come back to this a lot just in our conversations about D&D settings is when so much information is known, it does two things. Number one, there's a lot of ways to be wrong. Right, there are going to be people at your table that know more about that setting than the DM, and now that's a problem, because the DM, it makes it very difficult for the DM to create an immersive experience if they're like, well, actually, at these coordinates, it's not this town that's here, it's that town that's here, and when you said there was a town here, there's no town there. That's actually, you know, where a bunch of howlers live, and that's a dangerous place. That's not immersive anymore. That's actually breaking the experience of the game, and a DM is trying to provide or help facilitate a collective storytelling experience, right? So there's the more lore that's there. You want enough lore for an RPG setting. You want enough lore where people understand kind of the tone that you're going for here. Like what feels like an Obojima town. You want to have a general sense of what the people here are like, what the dangers here are, why is it fun to adventure, right? Like that's you have to have a reason to adventure. I think you want. Oh, sorry.
Like I was just going to say, bringing up your Dragonlance example.
That's the one. That was my biggest learning experience as a fan to creator, right? Going from a fan of an IP to a player in that setting to then somebody who designs for that setting. As a fan of D&D or of Dragonlance, so my first encounter with Dragonlance, like with a lot of people, was reading the Dragonlance Chronicles books, you know, by Margaret Weiss and Tracy Hickman. That's actually what got me into reading, period. And so, and then going from there to a player in D&D, and I knew way more about Kryn than anybody at the table, including the DM. And so it was very like kind of jarring for me to like sit at the table knowing that they're like, you know, the DM is saying things that are just not true about Dragonlance. Yeah. That didn't enrich my experience. But so much of what I liked about Dragonlance is that I was collecting lore. I was collecting truths about that place. But it didn't enrich my experience to play in that space. Yeah. And then designing for it, I was trying to find ways to preserve, you know, we always talk about preserve mystery in an RPG setting. Yeah. Preserve reasons to go exploring. Because if I go to, let's say, the High Claris Tower, and I know everything that's about the High Claris Tower, everything that's already happened there. And again, I'm using Dragonlance as an example. In Dragonlance, and during the War of the Lance, it's literally post-cataclysm. A lot of knowledge has been lost, and yet I know everything about this place. Right? As a player, I know this, even though my character doesn't. That's very hard to separate. Yeah. And so anyway, it goes back to, you know, if there are people that always want answers, this is not going to be satisfying to the people who are asking for this. But I think, like, allow yourself to live in the space that you, as a person who is holding the book or who will be holding the book, you own that book, and your Obojima is your Obojima, and there are truths about that are going to be different than my Obojima. But there are true things about it, right? Like if we say Yadaman is the largest city, you could change that. You could make an even larger city if you want, but there are certain things that are known. But if everything is known, then there are so many more ways to be wrong at your table, and that's kind of where I'm at. I mean, you just have to decide. You, Jeremiah, have to decide if you're building out the IP, and like this is a thing where we need to know all of these things. We need to know who's the leader of this faction and that faction. That's a thing. But if we're trying to build, like if we're trying to maximize the enjoyment of the RPG, I think, and maybe I could be wrong, this is just my opinion here. I think that it's important to preserve spaces for people to play.
I think the D&D community, I imagine, is split, to some degree, and I don't know what the percentage is, but some people who are lovers of the lore, and then there are people who are like, I don't want to know it. I want to play in a generic world, or I want to play in my own homebrew world where what I say goes, and I don't have to worry about like, okay, who knows who and who does what, and this place is over here and that place, like all that stuff. It just makes it harder to DM. So, but I also think that there is a certain amount, like as an IP creator, I have my own version of Obojima in my head, and who these characters are and what they're doing and what's their ultimate goal, and what the Lionfish King wants and what Venomous Rex wants, and what could be a possible outcome for that. But kind of really,
I mean, even thinking about when you were working on Descent into Avernus, right? Just using this as an example. Obviously, we were working for Wizards of the Coast at the time, so this is kind of like an official take on what's happening to the Forgotten Realms.
Yeah,
like El Terrell was dragged into hell.
Yeah.
Okay, that happened.
Yeah,
but that didn't
Classic.
have to. I mean, that didn't have to happen. I mean, we just happened to be in the building, being paid to work on that. But that could have also happened at your own table, right? Mm-hmm. Like if you never worked at D&D, like we never worked there and worked on that book, you could still have El Terrell dragged into hell, and like that's a thing that just on your home map of the Forgotten Realms, that's a big gaping hole. But where El Terrell
in the home game, we probably would have dragged Baldur's Gate.
Well, that's
just like yes, sweet.
Right, but like that's the point is like you're making that your own thing. And is that any more or less true because it doesn't have the official stamp on it, right? Like that's the kind of thing.
I think that's the interesting side of writing for D&D at this point, where it's like the simple act of playing in Obojima will create and split your world from others, and thus making new canon.
Yeah,
and so it's
becomes a Spider-Verse.
So
at
it's
some
like
point.
we can present as much canon as we possibly can, but by the time we even present canon, it might be different in your space.
Absolutely, especially like one of the things we did in Obojima is we set it at a moment in time, right?
Yep.
Things like the corruption, that's a moment in time.
Yeah.
And so we did plant that flag, and so you might choose to like, I'm gonna do this further in the future, or we want to kind of dial, go back in time, or not acknowledge the calendar at all. It doesn't matter. That's all of those are reasonable responses to playing in the game.
Yeah.
But I just think that I know that when I was reading Game of Thrones, I wanted to absorb every detail of information about Westeros, like everything. I learned about all the houses. I learned about everything I could about the history of the place, because I just found it so interesting, right? We were just talking about the Silmarillion on the drive down, and like how awesome and how rich that is. And so, I understand like there's a compulsion to want to know, first of all, because I want to know, if I love this place, this is one of the ways I show my love for it is by learning about it, and I want to know this information. But in terms of gameplay, not all, like just knowing more information doesn't always make the experience better. Is I guess really the summary of everything I've been ranting about here.
There is a balance to be struck in the Force here. It's like it's like having, as a DM, having a lot of knowledge about a world helps you to throw in things that your players can like go, whoa, it gives a sense of place for the players. It's not just like, oh, you're on an island and there are people. That doesn't give me anything.
Who lived here before?
Yeah.
But
it's like you're walking down and all of a sudden you see a big piece of stone sticking out of the side of the mossy, forest, mountain, hillside. And people are like, what is that? And you say, you go up and you see, and you're the Nakadama in the party make a roll, and you're like, that this is ancient Nakadama temple that's been like, this is your people that happened thousands of years ago. And all of a sudden the players are like, what? Like this is like this. And it gives also something your Nakadama player who's playing that character now has something to kind of role play off of and say like, oh, what's your reaction to that? This is your ancestry, and they're like, oh my gosh, we've got to excavate this site, but we've got to do it carefully, and like that kind of thing then is like what enriches the play experience without burdening everybody with like, you've got to, you got to know everything, which gets back to like, very basic kind of principles of like world building is like, is your world resonant? Like as if you've got players who are playing in this world who know nothing about it, it has to be resonant enough that they have some ability to know what's going on. But if you're in like, the year 20, or 3042 and it's a jellyfish world and it's a limbo and people are going to be like, well, I don't know how to play here. You're all like quantum robots that, or gene spliced weirdos from some other, like they're not going to know.
Just describing a Thursday night for me, buddy.
Yeah. Nobody knows how to play that.
Yeah.
But if you have, resonant fantasy, it's like, okay.
There's a lot of shorthand built into resonant fantasy, right? Like I don't have to describe the concept of like swords and things like that. And, what's interesting is like we have 80s tech as, almost like an archaeological layer of Obojima. And there are a lot of people that play this game that were not alive during the 1980s. So that was actually a discovery during the course of designing this, of just like, there's a lot we have to explain. Like, what is this piece of technology that's actually like old tech, to some number of our audience. So
I grew up with that tech.
Yeah. Overhead projector.
Yeah. I know what a cassette tape is.
Hey, man, I know what a cassette tape is.
I know what an 8-track is.
Whoa.
I'm sorry, what?
Yeah.
Get him. Okay.
Okay.
It was my tangent.
Yeah.
So I'll be blamed for that.
Yeah. People are what?
What I to wrap all of this up, I think it's an overall, I agree with both of your sentiment that the more detail we add, the worse feels like a harsh word. Not a worse, but a more difficult, a more challenging game does Obojima become. I don't know why I start talking like Yoda halfway through. The more, I'm not gonna do Yoda. The more detail we add, fleshes out the IP, but in the exact same time, takes away from the flexibility that the game offers. And so I feel like especially as we're writing into book 2, to tie it back in here, I think it's really about honing in filling in the details that are important that maybe people feel like they really want answered, but then leaving opportunity to be flexible when not necessary.
I think that's a great point. It's the flexibility part that I think that summarizes a lot of it. What I think when you look at the locations that are in the book, every location is a point, right? If you're going to have like this, like a chart of what is Obojima, right? The look, feel, the tone, kind of the level of danger, or level of whimsy, all of that kind of stuff is going to exist in some sort of on a chart, and every location fits somewhere on that chart. So you're getting this kind of cloud of idea of Obojima is this experience, and I think new locations have to basically reinforce that concept or push it out in a different way, so that like I know, like I'm creating my own locations, or if I'm creating my own adventures, they're still going to exist within I'm trying to say, like within that zone that has been established by all those locations. The reason we chose a lot of these locations is because they all felt they're offering something about Obojima that is different from each other. So they're not like, there's some overlap in tone, but the experience you get in these different places is each one is different.
Right.
And so now there's like this space in which if you're going to create your own locations and adventures, they kind of fit within that spectrum or within that kind of,
Yeah.
you know what I'm saying, you know what I'm saying there. But like, that's what I think new locations offer. They expand the concept of what Obojima is in some way.
Yeah.
Well, if you're just saying if you're saying, here's just another town, but it doesn't offer anything new about like what Obojima is. That's why I'm like, what does it do other than saying like, okay, if I'm halfway between this point and this point, I could put this location there. But that could be anything, right?
Like, I think like book 1 already kind of gives you sort of like what an Obojima town, like, because there could be, now we could make generic Obojima towns, and people who've read the book 1, will know, okay, I get it. I know what Obojima is, the vibe, like what you're saying. But if we do new towns, then it's like, to what you're saying, then we've got to kind of have something additive, like something that wasn't mentioned in book 1, something unique and cool. Like, I don't know what it is.
And they don't have to be all like super like weird and, they don't all have to have some sort of kind of bizarre element to them. Like, you have the town where everything is made of sand, right? Like they don't all have to be like super niche that way. But they do have to, I think they have to add something like, sorry.
I think what you could do is, not necessarily put this in the book, but as us, we being the writers, you could almost pick out the things that each town offers within Obojima and condense it down into a feeling or a thing, right? Like magic, spirits, coziness, blah, 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 da-da-da. And you make your pillars. And then what you do when creating new towns is you go, what are a combination of these that have never appeared yet? Like mechanical ingenuity is heavy in Skykite.
Yeah.
But we've never seen it in a cozy town. What happens if there's 4 engineers that started a small town and
It's
there's
this little
30
commune.
and it's a little commune in the middle of the forest?
Yep.
I think that's how you generate new towns within Obojima or new locations, is you figure out what the pillars are and then figure out how to combine them in interesting ways. And that in itself will generate unique things.
And that is useful for DMs. It does not scratch the itch of knowing every town that exists and where it exists and, the little like bits of history and things like that. And, on some level, I'm like, try to be comfortable with that sense that there is this kind of, there's a canvas element to playing in Obojima, and it automatically happens in any RPG you play, whether you know it or not. Even in the Forgotten Realms, where most things are known about the realms, it's still a canvas. When I'm playing my game, it becomes mine, right?
Yeah.
But I think those types of tools, where it's like I want to maybe be able to make a town that feels like it belongs in Obojima.
Yeah.
And this helps me get there very fast.
I think we should put that in the book. It's like we have our locations that we build, but then we have this toolkit. And it's like, if you're going to build an Obojima town, here are these, like, here's thematically what you want, here's the vibe you want, and maybe a random table, Jeremiah.
Stuff that's going on here.
Yeah, you could just roll and you could do a random town. But
Okay. All right.
I want more tables.
You calm down.
Can we have multi-armed monsters as well?
Here's what I'm going to say, and I'm going to say it to camera number 1, assuming it's on. Camera number 1 is on. Okay.
Sweet.
We didn't get to what's in book 2 at all, which is great. We talked a little bit about it. I think maybe this is a good podcast episode. This is a great podcast episode because I think it was more about, I think it was more about just our general feelings on writing Obojima. I think in podcast number 2, where we continue this conversation, episode number 2 of the new year, we'll jump into, after talking about it, after being primed, what now do we want to see in book 2?
Sounds great.
Like in terms of like subclasses and
I mean, any and everything.
Any and everything.
We got another fresh 45 minutes to jump into it.
Boy.
Reset the puck.
Reset the puck of time, and we'll jump into it.
Let's go.
So,
people.
with that being said, thank you so much for joining us on the Obojima Podcast. Sorry, I lied to you. It was a big lie. We didn't talk about everything I said we were In fact, we
came
talked about
close.
things you didn't ask for.
We came close.
But I think people have become to expect that from us at this
Yeah,
point.
we're
Like we
just
say
as
this
bad.
this list of like really like these were things we're gonna hit, and then we're just like,
And then it's like 45 minutes
Yeah.
on
You just,
the
like,
farming
you just
technology.
release the cats.
All right.
Like-
We're just as bad at doing podcasts, but we're still
There's hope.
okay at other things. Thank you so much for joining us. You can check us out on Discord and TikTok and
What?
Instagram. We're actually popping off on TikTok
Really?
and Instagram.
Oh my!
I know.
Hey,
That's cool. That's cool, I guess, right?
that is cool.
You can also check out solo videos without Adam and Ari, where I just kind of talk about Obojima in general, and maybe some other topics coming out soon. But yeah, thank you so much for joining us. We're excited for another riveting round of Obojima podcasts in the 2025s. And we'll also be having other cool content coming out soon.
Have we been doing this for a year now?
I don't know if has it been a
Just
full
over a
year?
I think we started January last
Holy
year.
When did
smokes,
we? I
really?
have no idea.
Wow.
Maybe
I could
we
be
started-
wrong. But
We definitely started early
Feels like a
2024.
year.
We should.
We're getting towards a year. We'll figure out when we first upload.
An Obojima have celebrations and festivals
We
for
should
such
have a
things.
festival.
We should.
Also, what do you guys think of the decorations? We spent an hour and a half putting them up yesterday, so you enjoy them.
Feast your eyes.
All right, I should end this podcast episode. Follow us on all those things, and yeah. Bye.
Bye.